When using design tools, whether it be Figma, like we're using here, Illustrator, Sketch, Adobe XD, Webflow, Framer, I've even built websites from InDesign before. There is a huge list of great tools out there, and the end product is pretty much the same. But one thing we need to really embrace and be mindful of is the way that things look inside our design tools, and the way they look on the web are going to have their differences. Now, what I mean by that is the web is a very fluid and flexible medium. We can select this text, we can change the size of things dependent on screen size, and also we can view websites on anything that has a browser. So that could be anything from a Palm Pilot from the 90s to a modern smartphone with a really high pixel density screen. There is a huge range of devices that we're viewing websites on. So there's going to be lots of differences, sometimes subtle, sometimes more obvious, between how things are rendered. And if you strive for pixel perfection with your designs, you're going to be fighting a bit of a losing battle there. So you just need to embrace the fluid nature of the web, and it's one of the things I really love about the web. So looking at our design and what we have in our browser and what we have in Figma, there's a few changes that we need to make. Now, firstly, our date is currently sat in the middle here, and we want to position that up at the top with our little underline underneath. So this underline, we have this off black, 1 pixel high, 40 pixel wide little element, which sits below our date. Our date sits at the top of the page like that. So how can we firstly achieve that? Well, the way that I'm going to do this is going to be via the inspector, and I'm going to add things and explain them as we go. So I, as a not so much designer, I'm pretty much a developer. I view the developer tools as a sort of design tool. We can actually go in here and we can change things on the fly, like font size, and we can, use our arrow keys to sort of change things. We could say line height, can make it 1. So this is a very powerful design tool as well. Problem with the developer tools is when we refresh the page, everything disappears. There's no real save option. So I usually use it for small tweaks and testing things out. And what's nice about it is I can see incremental progress. So rather than going into my code and writing everything in here, going back to my browser and just hoping for the best when I refresh the page, instead I can prototype things in the browser, transfer them back over to my code, and then carry on. So that is my process. I highly recommend it because it works quite well. You see things visually changing on the page a lot quicker. So let's start with this date. We want to stick that up in the top center, and we want this underline as well. So we can do some tachyons classes to achieve this. Now we're going to do it by positioning it absolutely, and we're going to position it in relation to this blue box that you can see highlighted. So to start off with, we'll add a class of relative to our big blue box. And currently all of our content is sat in the middle. So it's centered horizontally and vertically. But we want to break this date out of that box and stick it up the top. So for that, we can use absolute, and we're only going to apply it on large screens. So you see when I added that, we got a new style being triggered from our tachyons file. And some of the tachyons classes are very obviously named. In fact, it's sometimes faster to write the class name than it is to actually go into the CSS and write it out as a proper property like this. So what we want to do is we want to position it in the top. So in tachyons, we have a top 0, and we're going to use that large screen widths. So you can see it's just applying a top of 0. Now you can find out about this from the table of styles. I went through and I literally just searched for top 0. It came up with 18 results, and I just looked through and I found that it had some classes that could help me do that. So it can do things like top 0, right 0, bottom and left, and also in units as well. So if you want to use a unit of 1, 2, you can do that as well. So it's pretty extensive in what you can achieve with tachyons, but we're going to keep going. So we want to position it in the top, we want to position it in the left. So we'll say left 0 L for large screens. You can see we've just picked up this new style. What else are we going to do? We're going to make it take up 100% of the width. So width 100% and then L. So it'll be a little bit clearer like that. Now the reason for that is when we use absolute positioning, our box gets chopped down so it's only as wide as its content. So currently, by default, it's only as wide as the text inside of there, but by adding a manual width of 100%, it takes us to full width, and that is looking good. So currently it's on the very, very top of our page. So we're going to add some padding onto the top there. We're going to use 4 units of padding for that. And one last thing we'll change is our margin bottom. We're going to reduce that ever so slightly. And you can see here, when we shrink down the page, these styles are getting applied still. So we still have things like our padding on the top, our margin on the bottom, but when we go to our larger screen, we pick up all these large styles. So these things that are using our absolute positioning. So we've just written in a few classes there. Let's go over to the actual code now and save those in so we don't kind of lose track of where we are. But there's 2 things we want to do. So firstly, on our containing box, we're going to add a position of relative. And then on our date, we are going to say absolute L top -0 -L left -0 -L width 100 L and then PT4. And then this margin bottom 5, we're going to change that to be 4, and that's going to make it so we have a slightly smaller margin between our date and our title on the mobile view, or the smaller screen view. Cool, so we haven't actually written any CSS at all to achieve that, which to me is pretty cool. So what we'll do next is to add this little underline in there. And to do that, we're going to use a span tag. So just below the date, we're going to put a span with a class of line. And we're going to also put some margin on the top. So I need to just delete this code that I tested out with earlier. Hope you didn't see it. And when my fonts kick in, we will crack on. Perfect. The trouble there was I refreshed my Figma document, which is a very easy mistake to make, and I do it all the time, and it refreshes the entire thing, and your internet connection gets completely hogged up with reloading everything. So just be mindful not to refresh your Figma page. I'll learn eventually. So for our line, we have this span tag. What do we want to do to it? Well, I'm going to zoom into my page, make sure I don't refresh, and I'm going to inspect things. I might need to log in actually. So I'm going to sign in. Figma. Cool. So I'm going to press Control and G to disable the grid, and I want to look at this line. So this line is a 1 pixel tall, 40 pixel wide little element. So for that, I am going to say width 40 pixels, display block, margin left, auto, margin right, auto. Then we're going to have a height of 1 pixel and a background color. Now we could do most of this using Tachyon's classes, but this is something we're going to use in multiple places, so it doesn't hurt us too much just to write it in our CSS. And you can see there, we have it. So we have just this 1 pixel tall, 40 pixel wide black box, essentially. And it gives us this nice underline effect. So there are a few other ways we could do this using CSS. I felt this was the most straightforward way. So let's go and add that into our code. So I'm going to put in a new class for our date underline and overline styles. What do we have? We have a class of line, and then I'm just going to pop in those styles that we have. Perfect. So next up, what we're going to look at are going to be these type styles. So currently they look fine on our desktop view, but when we go to our smaller screen view, now I'm going to try and avoid saying the word mobile every time I talk about smaller screens, because it makes a lot of assumptions. It might not always be a mobile. There are a whole range of devices that have these smaller screen widths. They're not always smartphones. So for our smaller screen, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to shrink down these font sizes. So we want to make those 36 pixels. So let's have a look in Tachyons. Let's go to the type scale. And we have 36 pixels in the type scale. So this is the 6th one. So if we go right to the bottom, we have F6. So I always go from right to left. I go 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. And then on our desktop screen, we have a font size of 48 pixels. So our 1. And then beyond that, we have subheadline and headline, which are the massive text. So what we're going to do is, we can do this in the browser actually to see a bit of visual progress. On our title, we're going to say F2 and then F1 on large screens. You can see we get this F2 class. Now it's given us this value of 2.25 rem. And you might be wondering what a rem is. 1 rem is equal to 16 pixels, essentially. So if we say 2.25 times 16, we get 36. So it's a relative unit of measurement. So rather than kind of doing maths and thinking in multiples of 16, we instead think of multiples of 1, which is a bit of an easier scale to think about. So what we're going to do there is to also adjust our margin. We're going to make it have a margin bottom of 4. And we're going to reduce the line height as well. So one thing to be wary of is when you make your text larger, so sort of headline text, very big text, the line height gets amplified a lot. So we need to be mindful when we have larger text to reduce the line height. And we have some classes that can help us do that. So we have line height of copy, which is for sort of body text, which adds a line height of 1.5. But then we have a line height of title, which makes it 1.25. So we'll use that class name on both our heading and our subheading. So we can say line height title. You can see it just shrinks down ever so slightly. And we're going to do the same on our subheading. So we're going to make that F2. You can see it shrinks down ever so slightly. On large screens, we'll make it our bigger font size, which we can't actually see because we're currently not on the larger screen. In addition to that, what else do we want to change? our margin bottom looks all fine. We can change our line height as well to be the title. And then lastly, this paragraph has some margins on it by default. So let's remove those margins. We can say margin vertical 0. And you can see what starts to happen here. If you look in the inspector, we get all of these individual class names applied, but there's nothing really clashing with each other. So our CSS is very, very clean. These classes, they're doing just one thing and they're doing one job very, very well. But we're always writing a few more classes. So let's keep a mental note of what we've just done. What we'll also do on our larger screens is just to add a bit more space between our subhead, just to give that a bit of breathing room, because we've got all this vertical space here. Let's make the most of it. And just looking to see, everything looks good. One last thing we can do is on our box here, we have this padding horizontal of 4. We're going to change that to be 3 and then make it 4 on larger screens. So when we're on really, really narrow width browsers, we don't want to be having too much breathing room on the left and the right, because the text might get squished in a bit too much. So I find a padding unit of 3 is usually a good measure for the mobile screens. And that's equal to 1 rem, which is 16 pixels. So I have to take a big mental note now. Let's test our memory out. What do we have? So firstly, we adjusted our margins. So we can say pH3, and then padding horizontal 4 on large screens. Now on our title and our subhead, we're going to make those have a font size of 2 and a font size of 1 on large screens. We're going to make the line height slightly tighter. So line height of title. On our title itself, we're going to make the margin bottom 4. And here we're going to make it margin bottom 5 on larger screens as well. So this is really just a lot of spacing and trial and error, referencing back to the design, going to tachyons. But as you work through, you start to pick up these things. So in addition to that, we are lastly going to change our margin on here to have no margins. And just one glance over. I think we're looking all good. So I've just refreshed the page now, which is a dangerous thing to do, but I'm pretty confident we have everything in. So let's just do a little cross-referencing. If I just pull this up ever so slightly, you can see we are looking pretty good. Now let's go to the smaller width and let's see how that contrasts. One thing we can do there is to increase our margin bottom on the date. So let's go in, and where we have our date, let's say margin bottom 5. Perfect. So on the date, we're going to say margin bottom 5. And actually, on larger screens, we can remove the margin because we're absolutely positioning it, so we don't need it there. Cool, so I'm just going to write in some comments to say what we've done. Quite a bit to take in, but hopefully you're kind of getting the idea of what we've been doing. building up these class names to position things and just general tweaking to the type sizes and the margins and the spacing. But once you get more you absorb them a bit more, you start to pick them up a lot better. So here we use absolute position for larger screens. Because of the bigger font size. Pretty much the same thing for our subhead. So there's not too much difference between our title and our subhead. They're pretty much just changing the font. And then lastly, we're just removing the margins there. Cool. So that's quite a lot to take in. But I really labored over this particular one because I wanted you to really understand how we can apply these class names and styles that get only used at certain screen widths. That's the main takeaway from this. And doing it visually in the browser, we can see how things change. So as we go through, I will labor over it less, but I will still explain what things are doing. So one cool thing to note just before we wrap up is that we have only written 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines of CSS to achieve this. So this layout that we can see here was 6 lines of CSS. The rest of it we've built up using our design system. So that's one of the really, really powerful features of it, and something that I enjoy. So it makes things very, very quick to prototype and change, and you can see it live in your browser. And for me, it's almost like a design tool.